Hey guys, welcome to this episode of the TWNY podcast. Just a quick reminder that we are not professional medical personnel and TWNY is not a replacement for medical treatment. And as always, if you would like to be a guest on the podcast, head on over to our website at www.twny.life and reach out. I hope you enjoy the podcast, and remember, it's okay to not be okay.
Well, I've seen the devil's shadow underneath the moon.
We're going to get into, and I don't even know how to introduce you, man, because, I mean, I could sit here and I could say soldier, country music artist, author, like athlete, father.
The list goes on.
Absolutely. And you know, I guess my favorite way to introduce him would be my friend, Nick Rucker. How you doing, man?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing good.
Good.
You know, I'm still working on that intro. You know, it's work in progress, but we're getting there.
Hey,
We're getting there. It's going to be smooth one day.
Hey, I do a few different podcasts, and one for work, one for, of course, my free time stuff, and then I'm on a few every now and then. And each time, it's always something new for me. I'm always like, I want to say that, but you know, I don't want to drag out the intro. There's plenty to say, but I always think that short and sweet, get to the point, and roll with it. See what happens.
For me, it's like that's right when my because the jitters are already gone, right? But that's when the jitters are happening, and so I'm nervous, and it's like I'm breathing heavy, like I'm looking at some chocolate or something, you know. So I'm trying to like breathe heavily through this intro, but yeah, you know, I knew Rucker. He was pretty much the first. You were the first soldier I came in contact with in my unit, like my first unit, because you picked me up. You picked me up from the place I was standing there, didn't know what to do with my hands, you know.
That was that, and the memory that I remember pretty clearly is whenever I waited in the waiting room whenever you got your wisdom teeth out, and you came. I saw the video. I sent it to your mom, and she uploaded it, and it was, hey,
Rucker.
He had a mouthful of cotton.
I was trying to point to my IV. I remember. I think in the video, I was like trying to point to my IV and show you.
Yep. And then brought you to Bravo Company 701st.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's. Every time somebody asks me, like, hey, what unit were you at Fort Riley? I'm like, oh, geez, I was in quite a few. But that was definitely the one that I seem to always remember, the ones that I deployed with at least. And there's, you know, it's funny because whenever you're on active duty, right, you're in that world and you remember those things, and that's just your day-to-day life anyway. So it's like, saying, hey, I go to support works every day for work or wherever the case may be. And now half the time I'm like, geez, what brigade am I in? In the National Guard, like, I don't know. It took me the longest time just to get used to what unit I was in. I'm like, oh yeah, 267. Okay. Support maintenance company. So it's definitely a whole other world in the National Guard now, but
for sure, I bet, and I bet just that transition from active duty to National Guard, I'm sure there is a difference in like op tempo type thing where you're noticing that and you're coming to terms with that kind of difference, you know.
Right, or not coming to terms with it. For me, that's kind of how it went. It was definitely a night and day difference coming from active duty, where everything is very, you know, like traditional, and you know, you stand at parade rest when you talk to somebody that outranks you, and you salute and all of that, the whole 9 yards, and then you get in the Guard and everybody's like first name basis. You don't stand at parade rest anymore. It just doesn't happen. And being an E6 now, it's a like sometimes it always kind of draws me back. I'm like, geez, they should show a little respect. So
Oh yeah.
yeah, but hey, it is what it is. I think it's going into the civilian life from active duty. Your base, the respect that you get is based off of the work that you complete, and not so much where it's kind of given in on active duty. It's like, well, you kind of have to bite your tongue if you don't like somebody, or you think they're lazy. And where in the National Guard, it's like, hey, work a full-time job and then go here on the weekends, and nobody's going to walk all over me. Knowing how much I do during the weekend in the off time. So it's an earned respect. So which I think for the active duty guys, even me coming into the Guard, it's a little confusing. So
oh yeah, and you were right about the whole like remembering those active duty units. And I will never forget Bravo 701st. You know what I mean? It just I won't forget it. It's when I just recently did a promotion board, and you in a board you do your bio, right, where you tell them about your military career leading up to that point and everything. And I always struggle with kind of like the middle, when we were like shutting down 4th Brigade type stuff.
Yeah.
But I always remember like Bravo 701st, and just it was, and you had a huge thing to do with that. But it was a unit that left a lasting impact on me, military wise, because where I'm at now, and ever since that, like you were talking about with the respecter, and just how people are, it's all just kind of gone, and I'm not seeing it as much as I did at 701st. It was very like parade rest, very regimented. So, but man, we had a lot of fun though.
I feel like it's all pretty relevant, right? So you go through the customs and courtesies on active duty, where respect is just kind of given based off of rank, to civilian life, where you get thrown into a civilian job like I was, and you're like pretty lost for a while, because you're like, wait, I did all this stuff and nobody knows now, and you kind of have to find yourself again. And then you go into starting a family, and even for me, it's still a struggle day in and day out. Like, I'm like, well, I'm just older, so you have to listen to me. Or I did all this stuff, and it's like, they don't know, like, and so it's like you're constantly, being a male in general, you're proving your worth to whatever factor may be in front of you. And man, it's a constant battle that, I mean, either it's at home, it's at work, it's at the Guard, it's music. It's like, oh my God, I need a break some days, like, leave me alone.
Yeah. Yeah, and you're a busy man, very busy man. And you were always that way. I mean, we used to play guitar. You were practicing guitar sometimes at work, and I'd bring mine in, and we would go in there, and we would try and jam out whenever we had a free time. Don't tell First Sergeant Berkey, or Sergeant Beeman, yeah.
Or Chief Beeman now. We got away with a lot of stuff.
Yeah, we did.
Let's just say that whenever I came off of active duty, I didn't learn what real work was until I went into the civilian world, and I was like, oh, you actually have to do shit now.
Oh, jeez. You mean I can't practice my guitar right now?
Yeah. What? I'll get fired. What?
Yeah. So, and this was something that, and I read your book, which I'll get into the book later. Loved it, by the way. And I'm going to, post it. I'm going to test my editor and CEO, and also my cousin, and I'm going to have him post a picture of it somewhere in this space. But Time Cap, fantastic book. And I think it's fantastic for reasons that I don't think people would know until they read it, for sure. Like, it's hard to explain. But like I said, I'll get into that in a little bit. What shocked me was how much of Rucker was going on in the background. I call him Rucker. I'm going to say Nick from now on, just so it's not confusing.
Yeah.
How much of Nick was going on in the background while I was there that I didn't even know.
Oh yeah.
You know, that shocked me. And you know, I think this is a good time to talk about, because when I came in was shortly after you were getting back from your last deployment, I believe.
Yep.
And those deployments, they changed you fundamentally, your Iraq and Afghanistan deployments.
Yeah. It definitely did. I look back now, and you try to associate things that maybe make who you are today with those times,
Mm-hmm.
and try to figure out, kind of put the pieces together, like why am I acting a certain way because of something maybe that went on then. And a lot of times I don't think I've ever sat there and said, hey, I hated my deployments or anything like that in
Mm-hmm.
general, because they did, they shaped who I was and who I am. And I've always been a pretty like, let's say I was always pretty well, like I like to keep to myself, and like that's what always made me like feel like I was being more successful
Right.
by doing all that stuff. And so I had, on those deployments, you have a lot of opportunity to kind of be by yourself. And looking back now, there are things that I think from both deployments that I would have pulled from there. And a lot of it is, it's just the teamwork, the camaraderie that you kind of take on, and you have to rely on the people that you basically live and work with all the time. And and not to continue going off on the civilian world stuff, but then you try to find that, and it's really hard. And so I got particularly lucky with the role that I'm in, with a small team of guys. And I mean, we're no longer, I do fix guns and all that stuff in my at drill, but I don't do that anymore. But it's basically the same thing, or fixing people's houses and everything else. So I try to find more of the positive now, I guess, and not dwell so much on the negative things that would have really, because really in the book, I'm really hitting on those mundane days, those days where it was like you didn't know what to do with your time, and the thoughts that were going through your head, and just trying to I guess fit in to what that society would consider normal for somebody that's been deployed, which is completely different than what most people probably would think. But the thing is even getting off of active duty, out of the deployments, I would go back again. If something came up, I would raise my hand just like I did the second time and say, yeah, I want to go.
I mean, I think that speaks to who you are just in general,
Yeah, I just don't want to miss out, I guess. And I think like with the second deployment too, there was a line and it said either, hey, I can get out or I can go to Afghanistan. And I was just like, I knew I wouldn't be able to live with myself if I knew my buddies all went to Afghanistan and I didn't go and something happened.
Absolutely.
Not that I knew that, hey, I can save the day, but no, I'd rather be there and have been playing a role in that, whatever went on. So there's a lot in that book, a lot of just what was going on in my head, and how I was kind of like perceiving everything that was going on around me. And I think everybody's kind of thinking most of those things, right? On a daily basis in general. It's just, I always refer back to, in 2003, I went to a concert in St. Louis at the Blue Note. Well, I guess that's Columbia, Missouri. I saw my favorite band at the time, which was Green Wheel. They were from St. Louis. They had two opening acts, which was Leo and another band called In the Clear. And at the time, I was like trying to get my feet wet as a musician, and was with all my buddies who were also we were just making music and kind of didn't understand what it took really to get where we wanted to go, but we were just doing it. And I went in, and this guy in the clear, which reminded me of like a Deftones style band. I just asked him afterwards. I was like, I saw him in the crowd. I'm like, oh, hey, what if you were going to give your advice, any advice to somebody that's an up and coming musician, what would you say? And he's like, man, I'm going to tell you the same thing I tell everybody. He's like, you have to write about things that nobody else wants to write about. The stuff that people are afraid to talk about, because he's like, there's a whole world of people that are thinking these things, but they don't talk about it because they don't want to be weird, or they don't want to come off as, well, suicidal or whatever the case may be. And I was like, huh, at the time I didn't think about it, but obviously I've carried it around for almost 20 years. And and that always sticks with me. And that's what, and like you said, we'll get into the book here in a little bit, but that was always in the back of my mind. Hey, if you've got something that's on your chest, whether it be right or wrong, or it's going to make some people upset, just say it and see what happens.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. And I think that's kind of the motivation behind TWNY too. What we kind of started too was to open up a real conversation about suicide, because you always hear the same, I guess, mantras, I don't know if that's the right word, but being said about it, like, especially in the military, with suicide awareness, it was like, hey, just ask the dude, are you going to commit suicide? And if they say yes, like, escort him to a chaplain, like, that's pretty much, that was their solution to the problem. And it obviously hasn't worked. And yeah, I think that's a really good step in that direction too, is saying the things that nobody wants to talk about because it's taboo, and it shouldn't be.
For real. I think also, to the 22 a day stuff and all of this, my focus has always been, how can we get ahead of that, rather than, let's focus on 22 a day. Okay, you can say that, but then it's like, who's doing something about it?
Right.
Am I, or do I need to start something, or how do we know this? So, especially with the active duty side, right? Fort Riley, even whenever we were there, had a lot of suicides on a regular basis. And there's a lot that plays into that, right? So if you look back to the experiences that you were having and the kind of life that you were living, if you were on the edge of, like having, like, I just look back to Iraq, right? Whenever I was kind of during a surge time, they were trying to stack the numbers up, Iraq, because they just needed bodies over there. So they were taking people left and right. And the guys that struggled, I remember, I mean, I could sit there and say that guy has a mental health issue. Like, obviously he shouldn't be here, like, with other people, because he needs to have that addressed. And then maybe then, he'd be stable enough to come over overseas and fight for the country. But we don't need to just send him over there because he thinks he wants to go. That's where we get kind of in these situations where people shoot up a doctor's office in Iraq and shoot their own, the green on green, I guess, shootings and everything else, because who's really diving into the psyche of these people, even myself, right? And so I think we're asking the wrong questions. I think we're asking what's going on, rather than like, hey, the Army's very quick about throwing out some preventative measures to cover themselves. We told them, they went through this class, they signed the paper. And we're not saying, like, I mean, how many, let's be completely honest, I've 100 times probably passed by a bunch of just indicators that would have been like suicidal indicators. Look at Sergeant Matthews. I don't know if that was right before you got there, right?
I think so.
And so he was our E5, and dude was he was high on some kind of medication, like on a consistent basis at work. And I remember saying like, hey, this guy needs some help, like I wasn't taking appropriate action that I obviously needed to. I needed to take control of the situation, but I didn't know that's where the military comes in, right? They make you sure of yourself enough to do your job, but they don't make you sure enough to really control a situation.
Right.
And so he ended up dying. He killed him. Well, he had an overdose and died one weekend. And I remember the day he left, and I thought, dude, like Sergeant Rich, like I talked to him and I was like, dude, you let him go home. And I, looking back now, I wish I would have been like the guy that would have been like, I'm following him home. Like, I'm going to figure out where he lives. I'm going to make sure he doesn't do anything stupid.
100%.
But yeah, I mean, he died, and I just remember saying to somebody on that Friday, I said, I bet you he doesn't come in on Monday. And fucked up now, right? Looking back, but I just knew, I knew what kind of world he was living in with prescription medications, and looking back after the fact, I'm like, shit, I knew that was going to happen. Why didn't I do anything about it? So I'm just as guilty as everybody else, but that's the kind of stuff, right? So if we're seeing these things, why aren't we saying something?
That's a good question. That's one of those questions that should be asked.
Right. And we all know the person that isn't afraid to say stuff, right? Those people make us super uncomfortable, like from time to time. And we need more people like that, because I don't know how many times I've been called out on my own bullshit because somebody's like Leslie, half the time she's telling me that I'm an idiot for doing something, or don't talk to people like that, or whatever the case may be. And I'm like, I fight her a little bit on it, but deep down inside, I'm like, I know she's right.
Yeah, good wives are good like that.
yeah. And so, the 22 a day stuff, people post all that shit, and it's just, to me, it's like, so what? Like, at what point does it become 21? At what point does it become 20? Right. Like, do we have the numbers?
I don't think counting it is the most important thing here. I think that,
let's see how high we can get it. Yeah, I think that's like that. I think that's kind of like where everybody's at. Like, and 90% of the time, people just want kind of that attention, I guess. Like, hey, I'm doing push-ups to stop soldier suicide, but they're still doing it, so the push-ups aren't working, man. You gotta double the number. I don't know.
How many push-ups will drop the number?
Right. Yeah. So if I do 21, it'll be 21 tomorrow. No, it just doesn't work that way, right?
Yep.
I think we need a better plan in place, and I honestly wish I had more time to do that. And I've been even after coming off active duty, I've gone to people's houses where we're on the verge of doing that. Like we're knocking on the door of killing ourselves, and walked in on those situations, and it's gut wrenching, and it takes me back to when I was that person.
Yeah.
And still, it's like putting alcohol behind you, right? It's always there. It's in the back of my mind, like pretty consistently. I just have to do things, put some precautions in place so that it doesn't overwhelm me and take advantage. But walking into those situations where somebody's got a gun out and they're ready to take their life, and you're the guy that's going to stop it. Sometimes, they throw out all these reasons that, to me, I'm like, this is logical. Like, this makes sense why you're at this point. But convincing them, the world needs you, and letting them know that, dude, I was there. I'm still there on a consistent basis. I have to put in a bunch of work to make sure I don't go off the deep end again. And anybody that's ever been suicidal, man, if they sat here and said, I'm not that way anymore, they're lying. They are lying. Every single day you think about it.
It's a battle.
Yeah, it is. It's a consistent, just trying to stay ahead, which sucks, especially as a Dallas Cowboys fan, man. Like,
no, I hear you.
Yeah.
I know you always struggled with that.
Every Sunday, I'm like, I'm going to do it. That's the best thing though, is laughing about stuff, getting people in those situations to laugh about it, because then they're like, okay, then it's just like a little bit of disarming happening there. Things get a little too serious.
Yeah.
I've been around people that don't know how to communicate with people that are on that level, and it puts me on edge, because I'm just like, okay, you need to leave so we can actually get some stuff done here.
Yeah, so we can get somewhere for sure.
Right.
One of the things in your book that you talked about, related to your time, and I've heard you talk about it on a couple podcasts, or one particular, That Sober Guy, great podcast, doesn't sponsor the show, but I'm just doing a awesome shout out to him. But you talk about how comparing your service to someone else's service, right? And how that was a bit of a struggle for you, when you were thinking about publishing your book or getting that process done. And it kind of seemed, and I don't know, maybe I'm wrong here, but that was a bit of a source of depression too, was feeling that you were comparing yourself to people who had been in actual combat, or a different version of combat than you were in. You know what I mean? How their war was different than your war. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're more validated than you are.
Yes.
And yeah, you should go into that a little bit.
Yeah. So I always kind of sum it up to the military is like 1% of the United States, right? And so of that 100% of that 1% of that, it has been in combat, right? It has actually seen combat, and the rest of us just kind of prepare for it. And those few are the ones I think would sit here and tell you, like it's either it's done something tragic to me in my life at some point. I look at like Kyle Rittenhouse, right? That kid recently that was acquitted of all of his charges, rightly so, was he's going to live with that the rest of his life, right? He's kind of on a high right now, but guarantee he's going to be in a Walmart one day and he's going to be like, I wish that had never happened.
Oh yeah. The mental struggle his kid's going to go through for the rest of his life.
Yeah. It's the damage is done. Right. And he's going to beat himself up probably for quite a while about it. But so whenever I talk about like comparing myself to those situations, I always think of, hey, every time I get on an airplane, I'm like, I want to be that guy that's, hey, if something happens on this airplane, I want to be the one that's able to take control. But you don't know, right? You never know if what you're gonna do in that situation or how you'll react. And I think that's what kind of like beats somebody up that's been in the military and not in a situation where you have to fight for your life. It's because you don't know who you are. And I think a lot of those people that have been in those situations know, hey, that's what I would do if I was in that situation. Because I've seen myself react to that. And so for me to compare it to that took the longest time to really understand, hey, there's a longing there for me to want to be in those situations so I know what I'm capable of, and really who I am, I guess. But it hasn't been my time, obviously. And for sure that me comparing myself to, like, say, Marcus Luttrell, it doesn't make any sense. I was never in those circumstances. I was never SEAL and all that crazy stuff, right? And so that's what I had to come to terms with. It was stupid of me to always think that, and to think that there was no real validation of my time in service because I didn't experience that. Well, I think everybody joins thinking that's what it's going to happen, right?
Yeah.
Everybody wants to think that they're going to save the day and be the hero on the battlefield and all that stuff. Just doesn't happen for very many people. And there's a larger percentage, 99.9% of people in the military that are experiencing the exact same thing that I'm experiencing. They're going the daily grind. Life sucks. You just kind of put your head down and make the best of it. And those are the guys that I wanted to reach with my book, because my book was, there was there was a big struggle in writing that, and putting it out there, because hey, all of a sudden it's like, this is what really happened.
Yeah.
Because I remember numerous times being drunk and definitely lying about my time overseas. And so now it's like, hey, let's this book's a clean slate. You can read it, take it as it is. I'm sorry if something's not in there, or it's not exactly how I might have described it when I was wasted one night. But yeah, this is me no longer wanting to lie, or living a lie.
I think, and that's the biggest reason why I would 100% recommend your book to any soldier that's out there right now. I mean, anyone in general to read the book for sure, just to know what the daily grind is and what a lot of soldiers, everyday soldiers, are going through. I think soldiers who read the books, I mean, and they're great books too, from Marcus Luttrell, Chris Kyle, all those, they're great books as well, but there is that bit of disconnect for a lot of soldiers who aren't in that scenario. They're not in that situation, so they don't feel like what they're going through can compare.
Right.
What the mental anguish they're experiencing on a day-to-day basis can compare, because they're not experiencing those things. But you come out and you have your book that says, we were in the war too, we're fighting the war every day.
Yeah. And I think that, looking back on Iraq and Afghanistan, there is a larger percentage of the days where you're just kind of like, you want to go home and you're not in a good headspace, and you just kind of like, you can tell by I can read, rereading is basically journal entries. And so rereading a lot of those, which I just recently did, I hadn't read it since I published it. But rereading that and thinking, I remember exactly how I was feeling in that situation. And knowing that like I was no good for anybody at the time, because I was like, hey, I wanted to just go home. And I was taking it out on other people, which I think we all were at the time. We were all pretty much like throwing daggers at each other, just trying to feel something. Other than like homesickness. And so that was trying to, it's like I always compared it to Anthony Swofford, Jarhead. And that was whenever I read that book, prior to joining the military, and seeing Jarhead and all that stuff, I'm like, man, that's what I remembered. I was like, I'm gonna write a book like this at some point. I had a feeling it was going to happen. And then, you go overseas and you live it. And the thing is like, you watch Jarhead and you're watching an hour and a half of everything that went on. But really, I remember sitting there telling myself, like, I could do that. That's not a big deal.
Yeah.
But then you look at like, there's 24 hours in a day, and then you're there for 365 days or 367. And it's a grind. It is like, just to keep yourself sane. It's a grind.
Well, yeah, it's a grind. It's 9 times out of 10, it's blistering hot. You're away from your family. You're away from the people you care about, and thoughts go in your head. And not to mention, if you have a bad unit situation, bad leadership, which a lot of units are suffering, stack all that on top of each other, and you got that terrible recipe for disaster.
Yeah. Well, that's, and I remember looking back now, and comparing my civilian job now to, the active duty side. I'm like, I have good leadership now. Leadership that I was like, I wish I would have had this in the military, because I might have stayed in longer. And I might have, like not sat as a specialist for like fucking 6 years, 7 years, or 5 years, sorry. And then, I just look at that compared to then, and I'm like, man, there was just like these people, there's just certain people that you're just like, I just don't want to be around them, those kind of guys. And you just don't find, where I work now, you just don't find those kind of people. I feel like sometimes I'm that guy. And it's just because I'm like, I get bottled up sometimes. I'm like, oh, I got to break out of this being normal thing. So, but yeah, ultimately, comparison, the active duty side of the book and all that stuff, and how it's associated to the day in and day out grind of the military and Afghanistan and Iraq. There's just a lot of weight that a bunch of guys are carrying around, and probably, I mean, I haven't even dealt with it all, right?
Yep.
I'm still on a consistent basis, always like, oh yeah, I should stop doing that because it's not good for me.
Yeah.
It's not good for who I am, or my mental health, or whatever the case may be, or others around me. That's the worst. And so, yeah, it's it's interesting.
So I remember, so just to kind of segue from your deployment and from kind of when I knew you, I knew you love music. I know that, and I just got to say this because I don't think a lot of people know this. Maybe they do. Maybe I'm just naive of this. But you were in a rock band, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I'm trying. I can't. I think, and I might ruin the name, but I think it was Alone After All. Um, I have been
Yep.
trying to find a song by you guys, Alone After All, and I cannot find it. It's gone.
Oh,
It's gone on the interwebs. I don't know.
it's there. It's on YouTube. I
I
always
did,
have to dig to find it too.
I
So.
found a version of it where you're recording it because it's on the radio, and right as it starts playing, you're like, "Woo!"
Oh, if you find that, let me know, because because we were on the radio for the first time back home in Missouri, and that was the first time I'd ever heard myself on the radio,
hmm
and I was like, holy shit, this is happening right now,
hmm
and I was in the barracks at Fort Riley, and was like, what, I didn't know what to do with myself.
Yeah, and most of the viewers that are going to be watching this are going to know you from your country music, which is incredible too. And when you were writing this country music, you're going through that. I remember I would go with you sometimes to some of your shows that you would do every now and then. And I think what I didn't know was the lyrics. I knew that you were going through stuff, right?
Yeah.
And I never dug too much, and I don't know why. I was a different person back then. I know now like listening to some of the lyrics of the songs and kind of, just how you were at the time. I wish I would have, asked you how you were doing more. I
Yeah.
mean, I knew there was some stuff there, but asked you how you were really feeling. Um, when you wrote those songs, was it hard for you to write the songs? I guess is kind of what I'm getting at, because there was like "Love You a Little Longer." I know you were going through a divorce. You
Yeah.
were going through some pretty hard times, and and I'm going to bring up the book again. But in the book, you talk about, or not in the book, but you have talked about how it was hard to write the stuff because it was like you're reliving it twice.
Yeah.
Is that the same thing with your country music? Is it hard to do it because you're reliving these situations again?
It just depends. So I wrote "Love You a Little Longer," obviously in your room,
Yeah. I was
with
waiting to bring that one up, but yeah, absolutely.
within like 10 minutes on that guitar right there.
This one right here, guys. This
Yeah.
is
Yeah, I've
still got to get it signed by you.
Yeah, I still got the picture of right after I was done, and so that was like my first song that I had written or wrote that was my own. Didn't have anybody else working on it. It was just me, right?
Mhm.
And well, it wasn't the first one, but it was like the first like one that meant a lot. And so I think at the time it was probably pretty hard. I think looking
Mhm.
back, it had a lot of meaning to it. Now it's carried a lot of different meanings
Yep.
to a lot of different people. And so the fact that sometimes I sit back and I'll start writing a song, and I have a thing on my phone, a notification that 11:30 every day I have to write, and
Oh,
it
that's
pops
cool.
up. It pops up. It says, "Hey, you need to." It says songwriting time. And I take 15 minutes and write. And so I'll start whatever's going on in my world at the moment. Will start kind of flowing. And the fact that writing that album, you know, Nick Rucker country album, the only one in existence, the
legendary.
Yeah. And the whole story behind it, right? That was a growing period for me. That was I don't need other people to carry me through life kind of situation for me, because I had grown up so much like codependent on others to really, hey, show me the way. And the fact that, hey, I had written all these songs, written 6 songs, and had kind of taken the bull by the horn, set up to go out to Denver and record them. Done all of the stuff that it would require that I just didn't think was possible at one point. And
cool.
I kind of figured it out. But the songs in general, you know, nowadays they don't carry a lot of meaning for me. It's pretty much kind of like a chapter of my life that's behind me. As probably most songs. Yeah. For most guys. I think I rarely listen to that album anyway, just because I'm like, I record, I record and write so much, like, I feel better songs now.
Yeah.
But of course it's going to be like a stamp in my anthology.
Everybody listening, don't listen to Nick. Those songs are amazing, and check them out on YouTube. Check them out on Spotify, anywhere you can find Nick Rucker Country. It's great.
But you know, it's always funny because somebody will come up to me at a show and say, this song, and I'm like, what? Like, why that song? Like, you know, Tire Tracks and Taillights. I'm always like, I wrote that in like 10 minutes right before I went and recorded, which is good and bad. So the fact that, you know, that music exists is good. It's I can go back through there and I can remember I started writing this when I was 11. I started writing this 10 minutes before I recorded it. I started writing this in the barracks when I first got to Fort Riley, because those were 6 songs that I threw together over a 20-year period, and they just happened to come around in 2015, basically. I think, well, 2013, something like that, and that was, geez, almost 10 years ago now. Getting close. But going and taking the pictures, you know, the headshots for those, and thinking back to, like, I didn't pay my stepsister for taking those pictures. Wow, I'm a piece of shit. Like, those are the things I think about now. I just didn't know how things worked. But everything on that album was free, besides me paying to get it published. So those are the kind of things now that I think about. And then fast forward to After Everything EP, and then the singles since then. You know, the Dan Marsalov Story of the Year recording with him, that was like, that's that album, the After Everything EP. Yeah, and I just like, it happened, and that's awesome. And I can text Dan anytime and hey, what's going on? Never thought that was possible. I remember getting blackout drunk, sitting in my room before the Army, and watching Story of the Year live in St. Louis, like, over and over and over again. And I'm like, wow, it'd be awesome to be these guys.
Yeah.
And then I found myself in his basement, of all creepy places, writing music and recording. And, you know,
that's awesome.
That was at a time when I was just kind of like a yes man, let's say that, and was just kind of like, just do it and see what happens. You don't need to be like, you don't need to have everything figured out in order to make something happen. And so going to St. Louis, dude, that was on a whim. That was on the whole messaging him was on a whim. The whole agreeing to record, because I didn't have a band, right? So it was weird for me to go to his house and be like, hey, can you like record everything else besides me?
Hey, man.
Hey, buddy. And so there was some weird, he was already prepared for stuff like that, so it wasn't a big deal.
Right.
But now, basically recording in my buddy's basement, not I can't afford to go to St. Louis once every month to record now. So,
Yeah.
well, I can. I just can't afford the time away from home. So,
Right.
it's it's crazy how it's kind of gone from this, recording in Denver, not knowing an absolute thing about what was happening,
Mhm.
to kind of figuring it out in 2018 with After Everything, to now I'm like really not picky, but I'm like, that's not going to work. That's not going to work. Hey, my vocals aren't loud enough. All this crazy stuff that
Yeah.
I just would never have picked up on in the beginning, because I was still kind of coming out of that codependency phase.
Yeah.
Where I was dependent on other people just to figure things out for me. So still live with that every once in a while. So,
Well, I think, for an untrained ear, I think all the music's great.
that's the first time you'll admit that.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not an expert, but
Yeah, well, there is somewhere out there is a video of you singing, like, after you've wrote the song "Love You a Little Longer" in the
Yeah.
barracks room with like 3 of us in the room, like background singing it in the background. Now that one day is gonna be that's gonna be like the Nirvana tape recordings,
yeah. That's and that's that's the kind of stuff that keeps me going with it too, because music's been a part of my life I'm 37 now, and I started playing music when I was 13, so quite a while, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's not something that's ever really, it'll come and go from time to time, like the past probably year. If I'm not playing a show, I'm not really picking up my guitar a whole lot. I'll write down some lyrics and all of this, but I'm more of a songwriter and like lyric writer, and I enjoy that part of it more than I do, because I get frustrated with guitar sometimes trying to figure out. I just let other people who are better at that kind of figure it out for me. And so luckily I have a pretty good buddy in Omaha, Michael, who is a whiz at just about every instrument. If he can't figure it out, he's faking it.
Yeah. He's lying.
Yeah. And so, yeah, it's just kind of watching the growth through music has been pretty cool. And, seeing people have been with me there throughout the whole thing too. And seeing that, they're, oh, I remember whenever you were this and this, and, you kind of have to sit back and think, like earlier this year, we had booked to play with Mark Chestnut, and he got COVID and all sorts of stuff, so it got canceled. But people come up and they're like, dude, I remember whenever you were like paying to play and like all this and this, and I'm like, yeah, it's just I just think back, I'm like, well, it's just because of consistency, right? I just never gave up. And dude, looking back, there, and I know I'm going to live through this with Leslie's kids and my kid and everything else, is they're going to be like, how do I know what to do with my life? I don't know who I am. And it's just one of those things, like, it's always there. You just don't know how to really like grasp it yet. And so for me, like, music was always there. It was always my outlet for feeling good about things. And now to the point in my life where I'm like, music, that's who I am. Like, either most people know me by my music, and or know me about being a musician, or, hey, you played here, and somebody else send me a message or something, and hey, can you play at our event, or whatever the case may be? And I'm like, how did you even hear about me? Like, I don't even know who you are. And they're like, oh, so and so through so and so, and I'm like, okay, like,
that's cool.
That's cool. So music in general is kind of a cool world. You think about those people like that you'd never play with, and all this, and then all of a sudden you're sharing a stage with them, and you're like, how did this happen? Like, what happened?
What is happening right now?
Right. I don't feel like I'm ever prepared for those moments. But but they definitely, it's just like, tying this all back to suicide in general, and none of those would have happened had, in 2013 or so, I had killed myself. So that's what, I think I always kind of tried to go in the opposite direction of that.
Mm-hmm.
Was like, hey, I might as well drown out the sorrow with really good things that are happening.
Yeah.
And that's a hard world to get out of. It's a hard world to dig out of. I get a lot of messages from guys that I've served with and overseas and all this, and a lot of, I never share who they are, because, hey, that's their thing, and
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't have wanted to either. I just always have to keep myself in check and say, hey, not everybody's open and okay with that as I
Yeah.
am, right?
Right.
And so I get guys that message me that I just can't even talk about it with a lot, people, and they're telling me they're on the verge of suicide or whatever the case may be, and I'm like, half the time I'm like, oh man, I don't know if I want to put myself through this,
Right.
but of course I do. And then just get to talking, and really it's just kind of finding out, like, hey, like if you message me, right, and you're like, hey man, I'm not in a good headspace and I'm feeling like this, and just being like, well, what have you been up to anyway, like get you talking, and you sharing like, oh, well, like I've been whatever the case may be, and then you share some bit of information, and I'm like, that's it.
Mm-hmm.
So it could be like, well, my dad stopped talking to me or something like that, and I'm like, okay. I'm like, so, like, then
Mm-hmm.
it's about asking the right questions.
Yeah.
So I guess for anybody listening, like, get somebody talking that's like that, but don't talk about wanting to kill themselves. We're trying to get away from that, but trying to dig in and find out what is it exactly that's, the antagonist here.
Mm-hmm.
I remember last year, and I haven't shared this story. So last year, Leslie and I went to Hawaii with my dad and his girlfriend at the time. My dad, of course, is somebody that has never left his hometown besides for work and all this. And he's very much somebody from your hometown. And we had a falling out on that visit. I haven't talked to him since. This was 2 years ago, and so almost 2 years. And it was stupid. The whole thing was really dumb, and it was just a matter of like, hey, we didn't invite him to go do something, and it blew up out of proportion. And I was just kind of like, I'm not that person that lives back home anymore, so I didn't understand what was happening. And so we get to the past 2 years, and Leslie will probably contest to this too, is I sat there and I think on a daily basis about it. I'm like, what could I have done different? Like, what was going on? And there were times where I got down in the dumps about it. I still am. And, like, people would have to ask me the right questions in order to kind of dig that information out, right? Like, they'd have to say, well, what's going on in your life? And I'm like, I don't know. Like, I had a kid, and like things are good there. My music's like, my music's it's slow the past year, but I messaged my dad on Thanksgiving, and he still hasn't messaged me back. And like, and it's like, okay. So that's what it is. Yeah. And so then it's just, how is your relationship, with your dad? And those are the questions that I would need to be asked if I was, was taking it that far, just to get somebody to understand it. But that's how the ones that just do it, and then you're like, what? That happened, and they never said anything. And those are the ones that are kind of scary, right? Because they just like, they're there one day and then they're gone.
Because you don't know, because like with that scenario, that could have been something that not even a regular conversation would have brought that out.
Right.
But really digging deep and finding out how a person's doing.
Yeah.
Someone might have been able to dig that out of them,
Right. Yeah. And I always have to keep myself in check, because even coming back, coming from the military, give each other a lot of shit to a point where it's like, hey, this is a little too far. Not everybody's okay with that. And learning about that more in the civilian world, because not everybody has the sense of humor that the military people have.
Yeah,
And they're
I
like,
struggle
what
with
the
that
fuck?
every day.
Yeah. They're like, what is wrong with you? And so just always kind of like keeping myself in check and making sure that like, don't push it to the point of knowing that where you would go. But you know, like let's make sure that we're good to other people. And I'm not always guilty. I'm not always the best at doing that either. You know, I'm not sitting here saying like, hey, I'm the guy that you should come talk to. No, I treat people like shit all the time. Like it just, it is. Yeah, it is. It's who I am, you know, and it sucks, but hey, the people that I do are usually pretty good at calling me out on it and saying like, especially Leslie, like she gets into my ass and she says that, hey, you're being really mean or whatever the case may be. And I'm like, sometimes it takes me longer I'm not the guy that can just flip a switch, but it takes me a while to like, all right, I was wrong. It's just a guy thing. But yeah, so I would say in complete honesty, if somebody was, you know, concerned about somebody, there's a reason why you're concerned. And you should just have to ask the right questions. Most of the time they'll share it and not even know. But and you learn something about yourself in the process too, right? And just being, are you emotionally available for people? Are you like available to help others, or are you all about yourself? And a lot of times that's the check that I'm getting from myself. I'm like, this isn't about you, this is about them. And I always have to remind myself of that, is that you're not sharing your story, they're sharing theirs.
For sure. It's not, absolutely.
And I think that that's even with work and all that stuff. Like if you're training somebody how to shoot a firearm, right? You're not there trying to show them what you're capable of. You're there to teach them. So that's how it goes with somebody that you're talking to that's suicidal. It's like, you're not there to, I go down that road. Like early days of like talking to people who are suicidal was, I would go down the road of, oh, I've been there. Like, oh, I remember all this. And that's what people, that's the go-to, right? You would think that, oh, it's not that bad or whatever. Like I've been there in worse situations. Well, it's not fucking about you. It's about them. And the situation that you're in is not the situation they are in. So you can walk away from a situation or a certain thing and think, oh yeah, I did. Yeah, they know that like that it could be worse. Like it could be a lot worse. Good. Yeah. But yeah, it's not that doesn't help the person really. It sometimes makes it worse. So then they think that like, oh, am I just weak? Oh, okay. So it just solidifies, validates their insecurities in general. So we could really go down a rabbit hole there on all of that.
And you know this firsthand. And you've talked about your sobriety and, you know, in depth, but before that, the alcoholism kind of came to a head when you almost committed suicide.
Yeah.
But you reached out.
Yeah, kind of. So there was a couple of instances where suicide was like, it was right there, gonna happen. I had a plan, was gonna do it, fall through. I just could never get past the idea of not being there anymore. And I think a lot of people that are in that situation know what I'm talking about. And so the first time was just, I just felt worthless. You know, you just you don't feel like you're a man doing your part. Like you don't feel like you're contributing. The second time was it was always the accelerator, let's say, that was always alcohol. I like right now, right? If I were to go get an 18 pack and start drinking tonight, I guarantee by the end of the night, I'm going to have some thoughts of that, right? Because that's what it does for me. That's my association with alcohol, is it's a downer.
Yeah.
It's not an upper for me. It was always a downer. And I would sit there and make some poor decisions while I was drunk, and then I would have to sober up and I would face them for a little bit, but then I was like, I'm not okay with that. So let's get drunk again. And that happened, year and however many years, until finally it came to a head where somebody that does care a lot about me and wrote the foreword on the book, Eric, he basically came and got me and took me to the VA and said, man, you need some help. My grandpa showed up and that was kind of it. I had always kind of like a comparison, right? Is I'd always remembered stories. I think my grandpa had a little bit of a drinking problem at some point. And my grandma said, yeah, just one day he just quit cold turkey. And I think I talk about it in the book, was I always thought that would happen for me. I just thought that, it'll just happen. Like, one of these days I'll just quit drinking. Well, that was a different time. There was not, I'm sure there was AA, but my grandpa wasn't about to go to one, a meeting. And for me, it took somebody coming and getting me, taking me out of that situation and putting me in a situation that was a little healthier, which was at the Omaha VA, where they basically put me in a 28-day program, and I sat around a lot of people that had some pretty bad problems. And I just thought, I never want to come back here ever again. Like, I'm tired of like feeling the way I'm feeling that brought me here. And the alcohol was the big motivator. It was my crutch, and many nights just sitting there and by myself. I always think of it like this, right? Is I was always celebrating something. That was my excuse. And I'd be scrolling through Facebook, and somebody was having a birthday and they were out drinking. I was like, well, yeah, that's my reason tonight. That's how my brain worked. And which is absolutely fucking insane. Like, looking back on it now, and looking at like, I was using because somebody that I don't even know was having a birthday party and they were out drinking, so I should too.
But you were finding that reason.
Right. Yeah. That was just like, well, if they're going to, I should. And it's like, no, I'm not taking into consideration that they took the day off tomorrow because their birthday. I have to work at fucking 7 in the morning, and it's 3 in the morning. So what am I doing? Is that, and just always think back to there's certain situations that have made an imprint in my mind. And I remember one time, this was before the military, being in a bar. I know I had a stomach ulcer, probably from drinking all the time. And I was at a bar and I took a shot and I immediately threw up. And I knew it was because my body was like rejecting the alcohol. Like I had been doing it for consecutive days. And the guy standing next to me, I didn't work with him anymore, but I used to work with him. And he's like, do you think you should stop drinking? And I said, no, I'm okay. Like, I just have like, my stomach hurts. And to me, I'm like, okay, that's a good indicator that you should stop drinking. Your stomach hurts. Like, this is the last place you know when you needed to be. But you think my association to that and where I felt insecure in it was the fact that I was sick. I looked at illness as like, hey, my mom needs to take care of me. Like, I'm sick and I need to spend time on the couch watching The Price is Right, eating saltine crackers. But that's not who I was anymore. I was sick because of alcohol. And so it's no longer a kind of a juvenile thing where, or it's like, oh, it was fun and I'm not a little boy anymore. And that's what I was, whenever I quit drinking, that's what I came to terms with, was like, it's not cute anymore.
Yeah.
And that was extremely hard. The simple fact that it wasn't me going out and partying with my buddies anymore. My buddies were moving on with their lives and I was stuck. And I didn't know why. You look back on your own personal timeline all the way back to where you're like, when did the trauma start? When did why we're at where we're at right now? And I'm like, I was pretty young, right? Whenever the traumatic incidents started, just a bad stepfather. My mom just didn't know how to handle it. She was trying to raise a boy, and she, it's,
yeah,
moms can, but if they're in a situation where they're, under fire all the time, how are you going to do that? Right. Yeah. It was just a really bad situation for about 11 years. And I've all but tuned that part of my life out, and I hadn't come to terms with it. And I still work. I have to work on it constantly. But sitting back and saying, man, like, we went through some really, really rough years where we were just, it was abuse, mental abuse, physical abuse, and trying to piece that and make it, okay, that's where it started, right? That's probably where it started, with the insecurities, not being able to confide in others because that was non-existent. And really just trying to like fight for your life on your own, and trying to get attention and doing stupid shit as a kid. And so that's what it was trying to fill that void and find those things that I missed in my adolescence. I remember, and this is so fucking stupid, but I was always trying to find somebody that would just like take care of me, like be like that role model that I always had. And like, I think in a small town, there's always like some farmer that has like some farm hand, and you work together, and these two guys always work together, and they've just this guy takes care of everything on his farm. And I always wanted that. That was like, that was so weird that that's what I wanted, but that was where I was trying to find that. And I remember asking some old farmer one time, oh my God, I can't believe I'm fucking sharing this. But I was in a bar and I was super hammered, and I was just like, hey, you think that like I could just work for you and like we could just be buddies? Like, I just need like a dad. And I remember saying that, and I was like, that was probably the most honest thing I ever said at that time. That's fucking crazy. But yeah, my dad wasn't there, so why not? The closest thing for me was my grandpa and my uncle. But people have lives, right? They don't. They had their kid years where they had to raise kids, and they don't really care to have that all the time. So I think that ultimately, kind of all of that with the alcohol stems back to those years. Started there. That was finally like, oh, I found this. This makes me feel good. I can kind of tune out the world for a while. And there are days, man, where now I don't drink, or of course do drugs or anything like that now, and haven't in 5 years. But I'm always my brain's looking for that. My brain's always like, hey man, we need to relax somehow. Like, what can we find in the medicine cabinet? And I'm like, no, that's how it is. Or let's go down to the liquor store and get an 18 package. We can just pretend like it didn't happen. Like, that's what my brain's doing.
Little devil on your shoulder.
Yeah, basically. It doesn't happen very often anymore, but there are times whenever, the days get rough and I'm like, geez, it would be sweet to just unwind and not have to think for a while. but everything, all the stressors and all the work that I created myself. So I only have myself to blame.
Well, that goes back to you talking about how it is a constant battle. Even though you are sober, and you
Yep.
have been for a lot of years now. It's you're never going to be completely over it. It's always going to be a battle for you.
Yeah, for sure. It's 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 to the point where whenever I share the story, I'm like, oh, here we go again. And it's also to the point where certain people need to hear it, hear that story.
Yeah.
And like, I've spoke at quite a few high schools and everything else. And having kids come up to me afterwards, and they're not the ones drinking, but their dad is, right? And so they're like, my dad, he's going through this too. And how can we? And I'm like, shit, I don't fucking know, kid. Like, that's what goes through my head, because I'm like, that would be weird if he brought me to your house and you're like, hey, dad, because he would probably get like that would be odd. So, and then you look back and you're like, wow, I was that kid that was kind of seeking out, trying to find somebody to influence me to do the right thing.
Absolutely.
But in general, the alcoholism, it used to pretty much define who I was. And looking back now, I just kind of run into most of the people that I associated with, I don't associate with anymore. That were kind of like my enablers. And there's a handful of people that I do and I watch them and I'm like, yeah, you're still doing the same shit you're always doing. But hey, I can't control people's lives. I can't sit back, and I don't want to be the guy that's like sitting back being like, oh, you shouldn't do that. Because nobody likes that guy. And so it's more of like, for me, it was like, hey, I had to figure it out kind of on my own a little bit in my time, while other people do as well, of course.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, it's
the memories on Facebook pop up enough for me that I'm like, oh my God.
Yeah.
I think one recently kind of popped up was I was playing at RC McGraw's, and it might have been open mic night or something. Me, you, Valdez, or maybe it was Valdez. He may have just turned 21, something. And I was drinking a daiquiri or a margarita or something right before the show. And I was like, looking back now, I'm like, I could have been a better role model for you and Valdez and Giles. And
it's funny you bring that up, man, because like I haven't experienced alcoholism myself, but my father has, and I grew up with a little bit of that. And he had it really bad and he quit. And if I would have known the extent, we could have helped each other out. You know what I mean? I could have also been that positive influence on where you were with alcohol. You know what I mean? And so, yeah, it's funny that you bring up that you wish you were a better role model for us. It's like, shit, I could have been a better role model for you at that moment, maybe. You know? And
I remember you telling me your dad drinks sweet tea now instead of.
Oh yeah, you drink a shit ton of sweet tea.
Yeah, I remember you telling me about that.
Yeah. So, and I mentioned at the beginning of this podcast that you're also an athlete. And I have a feeling you're going to disagree with me on that, but I think that, man, you made a transformation that I think some people have seen because you've posted it. But which I assume was part of the alcoholism as well. When you quit and you found, do you do CrossFit? Is that what it is? Or is it some version of that?
Yeah, I did. So when the pandemic hit, I quit the gym. So it's been almost 2 years ago now.
Okay.
And I just invested a lot into a home gym.
Nice.
And so I just have my own training routine that I do right myself. So
And I remember you used to take me to the gym all the time, and you would smoke the shit out of me.
I would like to go back and see what those workouts consisted of now that I'm
Yeah,
a lot smarter.
exactly. But I bring this up because in the process that you were doing going to the gym, not your home gym, but when you were posting a lot of pictures and videos of stuff that you were doing, really athletic, really fit. You also at one point posted this kind of roughly the same time a tattoo that you got. And it's a phoenix, right? I think I saw it on your arm there.
It's a black swan, but yeah,
The black swan.
close. Yeah.
And you wrote
Everybody calls it a phoenix, by the way.
right. Okay, well now I just feel like that guy. I know you know what? I know it's in the book though. It's the last part of the book. You mentioned the black swan, and you got this as kind of like a capstone a little bit, right, to everything that you've kind of gone through.
Yeah. Funny story behind it. So I got it because it was a defining moment. I'd always wanted that tattoo, and so and I can share it here too. It's from an album cover from Story of the Year. And I always thought that if I was going to get a tattoo, I'm going to get this tattoo, right? And let me just pull it up here and I'll just show you. Here it is. If you can see it, that's the tattoo,
absolutely.
right?
Well,
so I went to go get this tattoo and I wanted the red and black and everything. And I sat down and he started doing my tattoo and I'm like, all right, so can you fill it in with red and all that? And he's like, dude, I'm colorblind. Like, I can't do color. And it's somebody I know and I didn't even know that. And I'm like, what? How are you colorblind? Like, that doesn't work. And so that's why it's all black and then it's got like shaded in areas behind it. But eventually I'm going to get red in it.
Yeah.
So I got that tattoo before I met Dan from Story of the Year. So literally, I think I talk about it in the book, but literally on the drive down to St. Louis to record for the first time, I had to break the news to him. Hey, just so you know, I'm not psychic, I'm not mental or anything. But I have your band's album, your third album tattooed on my body.
I'm not mental or anything.
So he's like, hey, that's cool, man. A lot of people have our something of Story of the Year tattooed on their body. But yeah, that was just a defining moment. So the whole story behind that, why I wanted it, this album came out in 2008. And so I wanted that tattoo. I always thought it was like a marker for at one point where white swans, everything's kind of innocent, life starts to happen, and you get to a point where, hey, you're a black swan, kind of like away from the crowd, not normal from everybody else. And so that's what it signified for me. And then the sobriety happened and all that, and then there was my motivator for getting it, was my defining moment, like, hey, I've gotten past all of that stuff now, and like now I'm a black swan, and black swan to myself, I guess. And so that's why I got it. And I was super nervous whenever I got it. I'm sure you were too, whenever you first got your first tattoo.
For sure.
My only tattoo. But I have a bunch of ideas what I want to do, because once you get one, you're like, I want to do some more. But I wrote a song called Superman. And
I remember that song. I like the video. You're under the water, right? You're in the shower. Yeah, I remember showing Beeman that. we were enjoying that scene.
He's like, what the fuck is Rucker doing? Showering with his clothes on. Never shot a music video before. That music video, Leslie and I just started dating, and this was 2019. So we've been together longer than that. So anyway, so I'm recording that. A guy that's never done a music video before comes over and starts filming with a Nikon D3200, and I'm like, here's kind of what I want, man. Like, I had some very big thoughts that we could not make happen, but everything else that I wanted to make happen. But I was thinking more of like, I want a 90s kind of style video. It's a 90s style kind of song. Walking downtown in an alley, and that's kind of what reminds me of music videos from the 90s. And so that's probably going to be something Superman related. Will probably be my next tattoo.
That'd be awesome, man.
And it's just because that music video kind of changed my life. And now, we have Will, and he's a little Superman. And
congratulations, by the way.
Oh yeah, thanks. Yeah, he's a good kid. He's a handful, but he's a good kid.
Yeah, man. So your tattoo looks great, by the way. I like it.
Thanks.
Regardless of whether or not the tattoo artist was colorblind, I think you did a great job.
Yeah.
As we kind of like wind this down a little bit, if you had advice for someone who has either going through a similar situation to what you have gone through, or is depressed, is in the shit right now, is not doing well, what would be, if you had one piece of advice that you would part them with, what would you do? What would you say?
I think if I was giving advice to myself, let's just say that. That's okay. That's because that's a loaded question. There's a lot that, but I think if I was giving advice to myself, it's and I was in that scenario, I would think that the one thing I would probably need to hear is it's okay to drop your guard. It's okay to be not okay in the moment. Let's just say that. I think a lot of times what people need to hear is just like, stop doing what you're doing. What you're doing is not working, obviously. And so we need to go to the complete opposite. And I guarantee it's not going to kill you being somebody completely different. Or if you're like the kind of guy like I am at times, it's like, I don't like to admit when I'm wrong, or I don't like to ask for help, or I don't like to show weakness, or whatever the case may be. Do those things. And I think somebody that's suicidal and sitting there saying like, I think I'm going to kill myself, I don't know why I'm having thoughts, or whatever the case may be. I think that if they heard that people care, like people do actually care about you, they care about your well-being, and I guarantee that somebody would rather spend a whole night hanging out with you and doing something rather than like hearing that you died, because that's a hard pill to swallow for everybody.
Yeah.
And I look back, and there's so many times that people have died that I've been associated with, that I could have done something and I didn't, right? And my cousin, she passed away a few years ago because she ultimately, she might as well have committed suicide. I mean, meth killed her. And so the hardest thing to ever do is go through your phone and think, I want to read some messages from them, and realizing that you're reading messages when you could have helped and you didn't. And so I think that one thing that's going to fill your life full of joy is if you help somebody else that's struggling just like you are, and you find a group of people that are hurting too. I know sometimes, like, I don't like to go to AA meetings. I'm not a religious guy, and there is a bit of a religion base to AA, but every time that I go in there, I walk out feeling like I'm a new person, because I'm around a bunch of people that have the same feelings that I do on a consistent basis. And if I were to walk into a room that was like, hey, full of a bunch of people that recently wanted to commit suicide, we could all at least bitch about the same thing together.
Yeah.
And I'm not afraid to share, because, hey, if you and I are in the same room and we're sharing the same story, I could be like, you did that too? Like, oh my God, that's so stupid that we think like that.
Yeah.
and then all of a sudden it's not so serious. And I really think that that's like, if I was going to give somebody some advice, it's just, I know you don't want to, but just reach out for help. Talk to somebody that you know, like do something that you would never typically do that's out of character for who you are. Reach out to somebody that you know would maybe never answer your messages or blah, blah, blah. Because I read through so many messages where I messaged like all these artists that like they would never read this message, but I just did it. Who cares? Like you never find, sometimes you find out that like 2 years later they do respond and you're like, holy shit, that's my idol. But yeah, ultimately I think that if I was going to tell somebody, you know, advice is just get out of your comfort zone, go do something about it. Don't sit at home and keep doing the same thing you're doing because it doesn't work. Obviously it's not working, and make it right. Figure out what it is that's killing you ultimately, and
absolutely
try to feel better about it.
Dude, that's awesome. And I think you just gave me a new way to ask the question, because that makes sense. Not what advice would you give someone else? That's what I've been asking. Whoa, hey, attacked by the mic. Not what advice would you give someone? What advice would you need for yourself? Like, what would you give yourself advice? And I think that it's kind of saying the same thing, but it's like you said, it's not a loaded question. I like that. Before we go, I have, you know, because I'm a big nerd. I actually highlighted stuff in your book as I was reading it, because it's a bunch of good stuff. But there's
Poindexter.
There's one thing you wrote in here, and I think it's a good quote to end on. How you see yourself. This is coming from Nick Rucker, everybody, the author. Man, you're good with words. How you see yourself is how you really are internally. Things are always changing, but it may take time for others to see physical manifestation. And I think that is a really good way to kind of sum this all up, that you can always change who you are. You can always make a change in your life. And as long as you're focused on that, it will eventually project outward towards others. And but you'll be changed on the inside. I like that.
Yeah, thanks. And eventually, yeah, those things, you become okay with those things of who you are. And you don't care if other people are or not. So it's just kind of like, I'll just take it or leave it. And so I think, like, even hearing that, I remember kind of writing that, but you know, thinking of manifestations and ghosts and all that stuff. It's like what it takes for something you can't see to manifest into a living being so that it can be perceived by others, was the direction that I was probably going with that. Like, there's all these kind of feelings and emotions and things that I know I'm having, but I'm not showing. But then all of a sudden it's like, oh, let's hone in on this one. And then all of a sudden you see, you know, my softer side or something like that. And that's where that came from, I think. And so I think more people need to just kind of sit down and write too. Writing is a huge thing. It doesn't have to be anything. You don't have to write a book, but writing it down and then rereading it, because ultimately you're taking notes on your life. That's what's happening. You don't know how many times you're like, gosh, you know, like, I've done the same thing over and over and over again. Like, when am I going to learn my lesson? Well, why don't you write it down? And then you'll be able to reference it and see what you did the last time and see how you can do it differently.
Yeah.
And history repeats itself. Like, you know, if we can't ignore it, it's going to happen, but at least we can have a good game plan for tackling it when it comes back around. So
Absolutely. Well, Nick, thanks for coming on the podcast. For real, it's been a real treat. And I'm super excited to get this one put up. Everybody, go out there, buy Nick's music, buy his book, book him for your wedding. Just get, you know.
Don't book me for your wedding. Please. No.
But thank you for coming on the podcast, Nick, for sure.
Yeah, for sure. I really enjoyed it, catching up and everything. So
yeah. All right. Hey, thanks for listening. If you haven't yet, check out our shop at www.twny.life. We have sweaters, shirts, hats, and much more. Stay strong out there, because this world needs you. And I'll see you next time.
Because of me, because of time, and what's alive, because of you, because of you.